I'd like to introduce Doug and ask him to open up.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all joining us today. It's really a great honor to be here. And although I lived all of my life in the New York area pretty much until making Aliyah at the tender age, 8 years ago at the tender age of 19, I've never been in Congress. And so this is really a thrill for me. I know it's what you experience every day, but it really is a great personal thrill for me, and I'm very, very excited to be here. Tirtzu comes from Theodore Herzl's adage, his famous challenge to the world, Tirtzu meaning if you will it. If you will the idea that there should be a Jewish state, there will be a Jewish state. And of course, he is the visionary father of Zionism. Zionism's greatest achievement was 70 years ago, the establishment of the state of Israel. Zionism as an ideology says that the Jewish people have the self-determined right to live in sovereignty in their own land. A land that was given to them by God, confirmed to them by the nations in national, international fora, and secured by the blood, sweat, and tears of the Jewish people themselves. Zionism is under attack in many circles in Israel, but that has provided the opportunity for people like Matan, for people like the thousands of young volunteers at Tirtzu, people like myself, to stand up and remind our fellow citizens of the goodness, the decency, the rightfulness of what Zionism represents. One of the things that Zionism represents, that Tirtzu practices very, very deeply, is the idea that when we are sovereign in our own land, as we are, we can be immensely grateful, respectful, tolerant, and accepting of non-Jewish minorities. Every year, Tirtzu hosts a conference honoring non-Jewish minorities who have supported, thrown their lot in, so to speak, with the state by serving in the army, by wanting to be part of Israeli society, whether they are Bedouin Muslims, Arab Christians, Druze. There's a whole range of non-Jewish groups, and many of them, particularly many younger people, want to be a part of the state. When we were approached by EJ and by the folks at the Middle East Forum about the idea of embracing and working together on the Israel Victory Project, we said, you know what, this is a wonderful thing. This is really very in sync with the mission of Tirtzu. Why? Because the idea of victory is not mutually exclusive with the concept of peace. In fact, we've come to the conclusion, as have the folks at the Middle East Forum, that without victory, we will never get to peace. Yesterday, Matan and I arrived in Washington, put our bags down, and took a walk to the Lincoln Memorial. And then we walked over to the World War II Memorial. And reading the inscriptions there were extraordinarily inspiring. And what those inscriptions talked about, from FDR to George Marshall to Harry Truman, was the critical need for victory. Victory. Victory in land, victory in the air, victory at sea. Not to punish, but to create a world where freedom would be possible. To create a world that could clarify the state of things so that there could be prosperity, there could be progress thereafter. When we talk about victory in Israel, we don't talk about carnage, scourging the earth, punishing our adversaries. We talk about the prelude to creating a much healthier, happier, safer, prosperous Middle East. Not just in Israel, but a surrounding Middle East. And so it's something that we feel very strongly about, something that we have aligned ourselves very closely with. And Matan can give you some ideas on how, and insights into how we have done that, how we have tapped into our natural base, which is on the university campuses, the future leaders of our country, to make that happen. Matan?
Thank you, Doug. I just want to briefly introduce Matan. Matan Peleg is the CEO of Tirtzu, as a homegrown activist with Tirtzu, started the first chapter at Haifa University, and was with the organization from about the end of its first year, really from the beginning, and has seen it grow and is now the CEO and running the organization. And he'll share more of the specifics of what Tirtzu is doing on the ground, and as we discussed, sort of the perspective of the Israeli youth towards ways forward in resolving the conflict. So, Matan?
Thank you. I want to say a few words about supporting and defending Israel. When someone is looking objectively on the conflict in the Middle East, in general, looking at the Middle East, and he wants to support a country. He doesn't know which one, because there is a conflict, and every one of us like to simplify a conflict by supporting one of the sides. And he's looking at this country and this country. In my opinion, Israel, because Israel provides more human rights to its citizens and to its people, Israel, as a Jewish democratic state, provides more human rights than any other country in the Middle East, and that's a fact. More human rights for women, more human rights for minorities, more human rights for the LGBT community and for the general public. The idea Israel is a Zionist country because Zionism, the Zionist movement, brought to the world the idea of a Jewish democratic state. It's not a Jewish state, it's not a democratic state, it's a combination. And this combination is the most stable mechanism that there is in the Middle East. So what is the connection between human rights and victory? Okay? As I say, now let's start really in Oslo. What happened in Oslo? When we tried to do, we tried to do negotiation and peace with the Palestinians. We tried to solve the conflict. Actually, we were really enthusiastic in trying to follow the Oslo Agreement. And with the time, like a few months after this negotiation started, lots of buses started to explode in Israel. Buses and coffee shops. I remember I was a kid in '91, and my parents were always afraid that I will go on a bus because they were, but sit in the back of the bus. If a terrorist will come and it will explode, the people that are behind the bus, they will be okay. And then my father would say to my mother, no, it is not true. Better they will sit in the front, because when a terrorist will come, he will for sure will go to the inside of the bus. This was the reality in the early 90s in Israel. And actually all along this decade, the 90s. And we call it, if you have Israel Fred, or you know that lots of people call it Korbanot HaShalom, the victims of peace. Like if you try to do peace, probably you will get some victims. People got very frustrated from it because the terror attacks were all over. Now, we understood with the time what was the approach, what was the Israeli approach in Oslo. The approach was, peace you do with enemies. It's Rabin's, the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin had a very famous quote, Shalom usim oivim, peace you do with your enemies. But what is the problem with this equation? That how can you do a peace with your enemy when he is still your enemy and he still wants to kill you? So this is the problem. Like, you want to do peace, but he is still your enemy, and the violence continue and continue and continue. And later on, it continued like this. In 2000, it was even worse because the second Intifada was also, again, like Oslo time, buses explode, thousands of Israelis died, And then Israel went to the defensive shield operation, very big operation to stop the terror, because what happened in Oslo, Israel drew back from a lot of places in Judea and Samaria, okay? And then the PLO came inside. So they came, they brought a lot of weapons, and they had like a small army, and they did a lot of terror attacks. So in 2002 was the year to finish it. But the approach stayed the same. So maybe it was not about, people maybe a little bit less talk about shalom osim oivim, peace you do with your enemies, but much more people started to talk about conflict management. Okay, we will not do peace, but we can, we will, the conflict is the reality, and that's it. In 2005, again, because peace you do with your enemy, but the enemy is the enemy, and you cannot do anything with him because he's still the enemy. We did in 2005 the disengagement, right? Israel drew out of Gaza. There is a saying in Arabic, I don't know if maybe you know, if you know a little bit about the Middle East, is mukawama. Mukawama is resistance. And mukawama is not just a word, it's a cultural thing. Mukawama. Mukawama al-Sha'biyya, the resistance of the people. No matter if it's Abu Mazen or Nasrallah or Yasser Arafat or whatever, every leader of the Arabs, and especially the Palestinians, always talk about mukawama, resistance. And when you resist, when you do terror, you bring violence back, because Israel wants to defend itself. So, just to close it, then people got a little bit tired also from this approach of conflict management, because the people see, look, we went out to make peace. It didn't happen. So in Oslo, it didn't happen. Human rights were down. Then we did conflict management, human rights were down. Where are we going with this? And even in the last operation in Protective Edge, 50 days, we were like shooting on Gaza. This is funny. The IDF theoretically can control Gaza Strip. It's very small in 3 days. But because it's a conflict management and not just going and break Hamas leadership, it was like, we punch you, not too much. And so because of this, in my opinion, the victory approach that is all about do peace with your enemies, but when they are defeated, people in Israel got it very strongly. When we started to promote, we do the panels in campuses, lots of people came, it was amazing. We have a very big Facebook group, 200,000 people. In Israel it could be a lot, I don't know in the States. So, and we took a lot of short speeches of people in the panel, put them on Facebook, and it was very, very viral. And we didn't even promote it by money, you know, we all do it in Facebook. And it was very viral because people tell themselves, look, maybe if we will one time insist that our enemies will stop this resistance, will accept Israel as a Jewish state, because if they will accept us as a Jewish state, it means they will not raise their children, that they will need to fight against Israel, they will accept us. Because of this approach, in my opinion, became so popular in Israel, and people are very supportive.
Thank you, Matan. I'd like to start off, though, and sort of guide some discussion, but Matan, you talked about your upbringing in Israel in the 90s and the concerns growing up, and I was there a month ago and heard similar talks about why Israeli Jewish society seems to be so different than American Jewish society. And your example was brought up, but from a more recent timetable, from the university students who grew up, you know, from our timetable after 9/11, which you have the Second Intifada, and you have 3 wars with Gaza, with southern Lebanon, and that psyche and that mindset has sort of pushed the youth away from this idea of resolving the conflict by discussing with the Palestinian side that who are we discussing this with? Can you share a little bit from your experiences being in Israel, sort of where the university students are and why, if that's just the reason from their upbringing or if it's a change in society? How...
That's a good question. Thank you for it.
It helps to project the voice.
Yeah. I don't want to sound, I don't know, patronized or something, but in Israel we don't have the luxury to be too open-minded about a lot of things. Let me give you an example. When you live in America, you take a bottle, for example, this is, I don't know, this is Vietnam, and this is the United States. Now, the United States come and do a conflict with the Vietnam. And then you say, you know what? Give peace a chance. Give peace a chance. So what happened? The forces are going out of Vietnam, and there is an ocean between them. Let's say that there is a conflict between the United States and Iraq. The forces are coming. You know what? Let's give peace a chance. Okay, the forces are out, and basically supposed to be the end of the conflict. I know it because of the terrorists. In Israel, the Palestinians are here and the Israelis are here, and no matter what, they will stay like this. So it's not a game. We are frightened when they are like, oh, if we will just say, let's give peace a chance, let's see what will happen. People know that bloodshed will come, because this is the reason that people are more, in Israel, the youth are a little more to the right. People were in the army, people saw. People are angry. They are angry on the corruption that there is in the Palestinian system. People are angry on it. People are angry on how they educate their children. So they don't want to test it. And because they saw also that every time when the testing happened, more people, it came to a bloodshed again. I hope I answered it anyway.
Growing up in New York, we learned that the definition of a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged, right? And if you take that individual definition and apply it generationally, the young generation of Israelis are a generation that's been mugged. They've been mugged by ongoing terrorism. They've been mugged by the romantic expectation of their parents, people my age, who thought, you know, if only we do this and this and this, if only we give this a chance, we shake hands, it'll all be fine. Rule number one, you cannot shake your own hand. You always have to shake someone else's hand. So if there isn't another hand to shake, that's a bad sign. Number two, when the hand that you are seeking to shake happens to be holding a hand grenade, also a bad sign. So what you have, remember, university students in Israel are not 18. They're not 19. My kids, I was 17 when I started college. They are 22. They're 23. Why? Because they've done Army service. The progression is you finish high school, maybe you go right into the Army, or you do a pre-Army prep year, go into the Army, boys go in for just short of 3 years, girls do about 2 years, and then a lot of times it's travel for a while. You know, get the Army out of your head, go around. By the time you get to university, you may be in your early to mid-20s, you may be married. And university is much more, it's not liberal artsy, it's much more vocational. So you have a much more serious student, you have a much more directed student, you have a much more mature student. I can say this because I was none of those things as a college student. So you have a generation today in Israel that has been through a great deal of conflict and has seen the reality of conflict and has seen the increasing disconnect with the idea of enduring all of this conflict with the idea that there is a peace to be had because of it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't congeal, it doesn't compete. And that is why when Matan said, you know, more and more to Israelis, the idea of victory makes sense, it's because, number one, the alternative has not worked. And number two, as we saw yesterday out on the Capitol Mall, on the, in the World War II Memorial, sometimes you need to have a very definitive change in reality, a very qualitative change in reality in order to prepare for a much better aftermath. And in the case of Israel, in the case of the Palestinians, in the case of the countries surrounding us, but certainly in the case of Israel and in the Palestinians, we have come to believe that it's only going to be with a change in the perception of governing reality, it's only going to be with a recognition by the Palestinians that their options are foreclosed, their options of resistance, their options of seeking foreign assistance to buttress their efforts that were really intended not to produce peace, but just to continue to push back. Once those things are foreclosed, maybe we can get to a better outcome. Maybe we can find the groundwork, the conditions for creating something much better, not just for the people of Israel, but probably especially the people of Palestine, or the Palestinian Arabs who live there, who in many cases want to work in Israeli-controlled areas because there's so much rampant corruption in their own area, trying to start a business. If you're a small businessman, Palestinian Arab businessman, the last thing you want to do is open a business in Palestinian-controlled areas because you will immediately have partners, right? You know, in New York it used to be the Colombo family or whomever, but in those areas, it's the PA itself. You know, they are your partner. There is so much corruption going on in Palestinian-controlled areas, it's breathtaking. They did a survey of the Arab residents of East Jerusalem not that long ago and said, great, there's now a Palestinian state. What do you want to do? You want to become citizens of Palestine, or do you want to stay citizens or residents of Israel? 76% said, are you kidding? Israel. Not even a question. So we believe that the people of Palestine themselves will be probably the very biggest beneficiaries of what victory can lead to. And we also believe that behind closed doors, a great many of them are rooting for us.
Anyone have any questions?
My name is Lindsay. I work for Douglas Alatabef, Congressman from Colorado. Thank you guys for coming to speak with us. So something my boss, who's an evangelical Christian, loves Israel from a religious, strategic, military, moral viewpoint, always asks me, and I'm interested because you guys do a lot of work exposing the Jewish organizations, you know, I don't need to list them, why they're so anti-Israel and why they work against, seemingly against, we know it's against, they don't know. So, but, so my boss always asks me, you know, what is with your people, you know, why don't you have one, and what would you say to that? If you were, for me to report to him, from what you guys have seen and all the work you do, why do you think these groups, I mean, is it, do they hate them? I mean, if you can answer that, if you don't want to, I have another question.
Good question.
You don't have to stand up.
Yeah, but it's...
Don't stage.
It's a camera, the camera.
Good question. First of all, I think it's not, in my opinion, yeah, I didn't do a survey, but I think people are complicated. Societies are complicated. I'm not sure that it's a Jew problem that they are better like this, because people are complicated. I see gossip and people are like against one each other in a lot of places. The problem in Israel, and this is something that Tirtzu is really, our movement is really fight against, is exactly what you said. What is the problem? The vast majority for example, in Israel, the people, they are very Zionist, they want a Jewish democratic state, and there are a very small population in Israel that is considered to be very far left, criticize Israel in saying that we are doing ethnic cleansing or war crimes, or occupy the Golan Heights, or do apartheid in Judaism, all those claims, yes? Not a lot of people in Israel really relate to it, because they know reality is a little bit more complicated or whatever. But in any very society, you have the radicals, small minority who thinks different. The problem in Israel, in this society, first of all in Israel, is a lot of money going to organizations that are considered to be very radical, that breaking the silence and B'Tselem and Mahsomot. Those are not a lot of people in Israel supported, but they have a lot of power because they get money from foreign governments, from European governments, a lot of money. And a lot of money from the New Israel Fund and George Soros. And so the radicals get a lot of power and money. So they are very loud. And so they can do a lot of campaigns, they can do a lot of lobby. They are very loud, but it's like, I'll give you an example. Breaking the Silence. When Breaking the Silence started, you know this organization? Yeah?
Yeah, the video, the last major one I was going to ask you about, actually, the one that Dean did,
Okay.
I went to high school with. Like that had such an effect here. There, it doesn't have as much of an effect, so they know. Is that what you're saying?
Okay, well, look, Breaking the Silence started and went with blaming Israel for...
Explain what breaking the
20
silence.
seconds of
Okay.
what it is.
Breaking the Silence is an organization that promote, like, bring like testimonies and do exhibitions that show that the IDF is doing war crimes. Okay, they are giving like booklets with anonymous testimonies of soldiers that like say that we do.
I was a lieutenant in a certain brigade, and while I was serving, I saw my fellow soldiers commit the following atrocities, war crimes, whatever. Don't ask me to prove it, but I'm telling you this is what it's and that's what they did.
So when they started in Israel, when they were established in 2004, the society in Israel was open to it. They did an exhibition in the Knesset, they talked with soldiers, the IDF invited them to talk with soldiers. With the time, people were like, what you are saying is not really exactly. So they stopped to promote those ideas in Israel, and they went with it to do exhibitions in the Europe and the United States, and then they got a lot of money. Organizations their business is to discredit Israel get a lot of money. It's business. Why I'm very angry, for example, on those human rights organizations? Because I'm saying you are not human rights organization. You benefit out of the conflict. The conflict is your business. You don't want to solve the problem. You make a business out of it with your false claims. So I think this is the problem. Small organizations, tons of money, comes from outside and blame us with those things. But theoretically, if this is like an alien, he can give money to those radicals, he can give money to those radicals. And then those people will be more loud. I think basically we don't want radicals in any side to be so strong. But this is the explanation as we see it. Thank you.
Sure. Question for Doug. You mentioned victory. Could you just elaborate more on what the concept of victory would entail?
That's a great question. And I have that question at first too. Basically, okay, now you've won, now what happens? And I think the fairest answer to that question is, you remember Justice Stewart's famous adage about pornography. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. When victory comes, we will have a better sense of what to do with it than we can talk about right now. We can talk about what victory means, but we can't necessarily speak intelligently about the aftermath because we don't know what the conditions on the ground will be at that time.
I'm sorry, I meant to ask what would victory mean?
Okay, so what victory means, as I see it, is that the Palestinians realize that there are options to go to European governments, say, for help in funding NGOs, whether they're in Palestine or in Israel, will meet with no approval, will meet with no audience, will not advance their cause. Their attempt to use international organizations, whether it's UNESCO, which has become a farce, right? Because Jerusalem has no Jewish heritage, will reach a dead end. That the donors to them will say, look, you're taking our money and you're either just stealing it, you're not using it for the good of your citizens, so we're not going to support you anymore. So those things are what victory means. It's not a military outcome, because there's not a military conflict per se. There is a war of ideas, there is a war of ideology. So victory really means a defeat of the ideology of resistance, as Matan talked about, that somehow resistance has proven to be futile. And it may very well be that the Palestinian people themselves will rise up and say, we want leaders who actually care about us, not about their own agenda. And in caring about us, we're much more focused on the welfare of our children, on the welfare of future generations, and that is also means that we're not going to continue to keep pushing because it hasn't worked for us. To keep pushing in that way has been a dead end for us and for our children. So that is what I would say is what victory entails.
Just to elaborate on that with the Israel Victory Project and how we define that term, and Doug's point is a perfect example of what we're doing, which is engaging in this discussion of ideas about what does that end game look like. We don't promote the end game of what a final status would look like. We're trying to set the conditions in place so that there can be those discussions, real legitimate discussions to actually end the conflict. Victory is defined for us as the moment that Arab rejectionism, the Palestinian rejectionism of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state ends. And it's very important to understand that this isn't something that will be achieved in 2 to 3 years. I mean, if you think about how long this has been going on, the Arab rejectionism of Israel, you can argue goes back at least 100 years to the Balfour Declaration. You could argue goes back 70 years to the creation of the State of Israel. You can look at all these different points, but this has been going on for a long time. And if you look at the Oslo process of 24 plus years, we're trying to move away from that. And in order to shift their society, it's going to take multiple generations to get Palestinian society to a point where they recognize and accept Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, not just in words, but in actions. So it's, the term normalization. It's at that point of normalization that, Israeli can walk or drive into certain territories that don't have signs right now that say Israeli law forbids Israeli citizens from entering into Area A, which is under Palestinian control. Those are the markers that you could point to say that things have changed, that normalization has occurred, that Palestinians and Israelis can actually live together, in the sense of interacting with each other and without the worry that there's going to be a murder. Those are the actual steps on the ground where you can look and say victory has been achieved. This is an end to the conflict. The Palestinian side has accepted Israel's legitimate right to exist as a Jewish state. Last question.
Yeah, Adam from Congressman Pocan's office. The possible Fatah-Hamas merger, does that affect the outlook for victory, the process at all, or is that something that's sort of going on outside of the realm of what you guys are working for?
Well, by EJ's very succinct definition of it, it obviously sets it back since Hamas has absolutely no interest in accepting a Jewish state or Israel as a state, let alone a Jewish state. So one could say that that represents a step back. But I think, and you may have another sense of this, but most Israelis view it as like a sideshow. It's it's a dance that will end. It has happened several times before, and no one's really paying very strong attention.
Thanks. Thank you for that. And thank you all for coming.